They laughed. At first, for years, Japanese pilots had ruled the skies. Their Zero fighters were faster, lighter, deadlier than anything the Allies could build. But on one day in 1944, that laughter turned to silence, and then to smoke. By nightfall, more than 400 Japanese planes had vanished, and the Imperial Navy would never recover. It was June 19th, 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Pacific War had reached its turning point. After years of brutal island fighting, the United States was pushing closer and closer to Japan itself. The next targets were the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, stepping stones toward Tokyo, and key to cutting Japan's supply lines. The Japanese knew they couldn't lose them, so they gathered everything that remained of their once mighty carrier fleet: 9 carriers, over 450 aircraft, and the best pilots they could still find. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa believed he could lure the Americans into a trap. Across the sea, Admiral Raymond Spruance and Admiral Mark Mitcher commanded the U.S. Fifth Fleet, the largest naval force the world had ever seen. 15 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, hundreds of support ships, thousands of planes. It was a showdown of empires and a test of air power that would decide who controlled the Pacific sky. On the morning of June 19th, the Japanese struck first. Radar on the American ships lit up with signals, hundreds of incoming contacts, wave after wave of aircraft. Bogies inbound, bearing 320, distance 150 miles. The call echoed across every U.S. carrier deck. Fighter crews ran for their planes, Hellcats roaring to life, propellers biting the wind. It was time, but the Japanese pilots, confident, even cocky, had no idea what they were flying into. They believed the Americans were still the clumsy rookies they had shredded at Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea. They were wrong. As the first Zero squadrons appeared over the horizon, they were met not by confusion, but by precision. American radar had tracked them from the moment they launched. Hellcats were already climbing to meet them, stacked in perfect formations, guided by skilled controllers aboard the carriers. The sky above the fleet erupted. Tracer fire stitched across the clouds. Planes burst into fireballs. Within minutes, dozens of Japanese aircraft were falling into the sea. From the flight decks below, sailors stared in disbelief. It was like watching a storm of flaming metal rain from heaven. Pilots later said it looked like a turkey shoot, a massacre in the open sky. Ensign Alexander Vrasiu, a 25-year-old American fighter ace, gunned his F-6F Hellcat into a climb. His hands were steady, his voice calm over the radio. He spotted a formation of dive bombers heading straight for the carriers. "I see them." Going in, he dove through their formation, firing burst after burst from his 6.50 caliber guns. One bomber exploded, then another, and another. In just 8 minutes, Vrasiu shot down 6 enemy planes. When he landed, his plane's gun barrels were glowing red. He was greeted not with cheers, but with silent awe. The deck crew could hardly believe what they'd seen. Across the ocean, on the Japanese carriers, young pilots waited for their comrades to return. Minutes turned to hours, but the sky remained empty. A Japanese petty officer later recalled, "We sent out 4 groups. None came back. The sea was dotted with burning aircraft. We knew then. The air was no longer ours." You can imagine the silence in those ready rooms. The laughter is gone. The fear is setting in. So how could one side lose 400 aircraft in a single day? It came down to training, technology, and tactics. At the start of the war, Japan's naval aviators were the elite of the elite, handpicked, meticulously trained veterans of combat over China and the Pacific. But years of war had bled them dry. By 1944, most of the original aces were dead, replaced by recruits with barely 100 flight hours of experience. Meanwhile, the United States had built an industrial and training machine unlike anything in history. Their pilots trained for 600 hours before combat. Their planes, especially the F-6F Hellcat, were rugged, heavily armed, and equipped with advanced radio and radar systems. Even before the Japanese could see the enemy, they were already being tracked, intercepted, and destroyed. And the American carriers? They formed a defensive wall of steel and coordination, anti-aircraft fire, radar picket ships, and combat air patrols working together like clockwork. Every advantage Japan once had, agility, surprise, precision, was gone. By mid-afternoon, the sky over the Philippine Sea was a graveyard. Black plumes of smoke rose from the horizon, twisting into the clouds like funeral banners. The Japanese launched 4 massive strikes that day, more than 370 aircraft. Almost none made it back. One American pilot described it simply: "They just kept coming, and we just kept shooting them down." By sunset, the ocean was littered with burning fuel, debris, and the faint orange glow of flares marking where men had gone down. Admiral Ozawa's proud fleet, the pride of the Imperial Navy, was now crippled. His flagship Taiho, the newest Japanese carrier, took a single torpedo hit from an American submarine and exploded hours later. Another carrier, Shokaku, followed, engulfed in fire, sinking beneath the waves. When Ozawa tried to radio Tokyo, the static was deafening. The Imperial Navy's air arm, once feared across the Pacific, had been erased in a single day. The Americans called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. To the Japanese, it was the death of naval aviation. When the sun rose on June 20th, the Americans went hunting. Admiral Mitchell ordered a long-range strike against the fleeing Japanese fleet, a daring night mission stretching the limits of their fuel and endurance. Hundreds of American planes roared off the decks, chasing the retreating carriers. They found them, bombed them, and burned them. By the end of the second day, Japan had lost 3 carriers, over 400 aircraft, and nearly 3,000 men. The US lost fewer than 30 planes in combat. From that day on, Japan would never again mount a major carrier offensive. Its remaining ships were stripped of aircraft and used as decoys in later battles, floating ghosts of a vanished empire. For the young pilots who survived, it was the end of an illusion. The myth of the invincible Zero had died over the Philippine Sea, and with it, the last hope of Japanese air supremacy. In Tokyo, the loss was hidden from the public, but among officers, one grim truth spread through whispers. The Navy has no more pilots, only planes. It was a quiet admission that the war they had started could no longer be won. History remembers June 19th, 1944, not just as a victory, but as the moment when air power itself changed forever. Technology, training, and coordination had replaced bravado and instinct. The age of the lone ace was over, and the age of systems, machines, and mass production had begun. For Japan, it marked the start of the end. For America, it was proof that industry and discipline could conquer even the fiercest spirit. 400 planes vanished in a single day, but with them vanished an entire era of warfare. And that's why, when we talk about the Pacific War, the Battle of the Philippine Sea stands as both a triumph and a tragedy. The day the sky itself was conquered. If you want to hear more stories like this, of courage, loss, and the turning points that shaped history, make sure to subscribe to Wartime Legends. Because history doesn't just live in books, it lives in the skies, the seas, and the memories of those who were there.